What's up, comic book fans? Pete here from Comic Books Transformed, where me and my good friend over there, Brian, talk about streaming shows and movies that are based on comic books. We have been covering Terminator Zero, which came out quite a few weeks ago at this point, but we like to cover it in little installments versus binge watching it and then doing a big review.
It came out a month ago on Judgment Day.
Oh, shit. That's cool. That's cool. And we're still here and we're still recording. So I have to say that for me, the way the show ended, it went in a direction I wasn't expecting, and that was really exciting for me. Would you say the same?
Yeah, I remember one night I woke up. I must have fell asleep on the couch or something. I just woke up and it was like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm very much never awake at that time in my older age.
Right.
And I sat down and watched the show, and I was just like, holy shit, this is so good.
Yeah.
That was just when I was in episode 7. Like, I don't think I messaged you again after I finished 8 or anything. But like episodes, we're talking about episode 7 and 8 today, if we didn't make that clear. And I guess we're going full spoilers here. I mean, you probably, if you're a fan of the show, you probably watched the whole thing a long time ago. We only just watched it a couple days ago or something.
Right.
So, episode 7, just like you said, went in this very unique direction. It is honestly possibly the most exciting version of Terminator that I've watched. It might honestly be my favorite now. As great as T2 is, and all the thematically, and the fact that it's a live action movie from 30, 40 years ago, and still holds up to this day, is incredible. But like, this is the kind of thing that I like. I like these complicated stories with kind of moral questioning and just not like clear good bad. Like, I loved the kind of questions this show is asked and the issues it's presented and how they just chose to tackle them, and the surprising choices they made along the way.
Yeah. Well, the biggest surprise, which, like, we watch so much stuff on this channel. We cover so many different things. You can kind of predict certain story beats and reveals and stuff. You're like, oh, I think this is probably going to happen, or they've been alluding to this. But the fact that Malcolm was from the future, I just did not predict or think.
I mean, they alluded to him having a lot of knowledge about what would happen, and that was really the only way for him to know, was if he was also from the future. But what makes it so interesting is how and we've sort of talked about this before, how they've explained time travel is you're not going into the past, you're going into a past. And I think that's what makes this so much more interesting to me than I ever expected it to be. And I was excited to see it in the first place.
Yeah. Terminator is interesting because there's been 6 movies at this point and a TV show, but I haven't watched the Sarah Connor Chronicles, so I can't vouch for it. But it always seems to be sort of like held within these like rigorous rules where it's kind of like, okay, Judgment Day comes pretty much in every situation. Then they send back a traveler at the end of the war between humans and machines, and pretty much like it's reaches like crescendo point in the future, and that's why they're sending people back. But this with Malcolm, it's like his future that he comes from is beyond the other futures of the other Terminator movies.
Yeah, essentially. So Malcolm is born in 2025.
I think so. Yeah.
But although all these dates we're saying, they're all different, so it doesn't even really matter.
Right.
And then, so when he goes back in time eventually to 1983, he essentially creates a whole new reality.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's something that the other entries in the franchise didn't really do. I do think that there have been some things that rewrote time, but I feel like they were all kind of layered in a way.
Yeah.
And this feels...
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that like Genesis kind of plays with that idea, and also Dark Fate. But even like Terminator 3, Judgment Day happens still, but it's pushed back. And the way that it happens is different. So, they do kind of create like a new future, but Skynet's pretty much the same in Terminator 3.
What I mean is that I feel like the time travel, at least in the earlier Terminator movies and possibly even Sarah Connor Chronicles, I feel like they're layered on top of each other in a way. Like,
Yeah.
it is a repeating of the same past in a way, and which this show establishes is not happening.
Right. Except for that Dark Fate, man. You got to see that one still.
I gotta watch it. Yeah, it's on something I haven't watched yet. I have so many things to watch with all these shows out, all these movies I want to watch. You got me wanting to watch Rebel Ridge. Is that it?
How fucking hard is it to say these things, right? Rebel Ridge,
Rebel
Sarah
Ridge.
Connor Chronicles. It's like,
Yeah.
you can't fucking say these things. Yeah, and then you got this like asshole friend who's always sending you messages on Twitter saying, "Hey, you should watch this. You should watch this. Watch 12 Monkeys." You know?
Well, I'm the asshole telling you, hey, check out this comic book that you can't buy right now.
Right. I know it. Yeah. The misery of being middle-aged men, right? That are obsessed with so many genres. But I have to say though that like as far as like predictions go and stuff, there's that scene when Malcolm is born, and I was like, oh, is his mom Aiko?
Yeah,
Did you think that?
Yeah, there was one shot. Well, first of all, you see Ani there on the left there, who we still don't know if it was a girlfriend or a sister or maybe he's just a nurse. Who knows?
Yeah.
But you kind of see like the silhouette of the haircut. You can kind of tell they were trying to be a little coy about it. But there is a shot holding the baby. Like you see the whole bottom of her face. Like there's no doubt in my mind it was Aiko from that exact moment.
Yeah. So I mean, like that's cool. And then that brings up all this like time travel paradox shit that we can talk about at the end there. But I was wondering, since Aiko is Malcolm's mom, do you think that Aiko is also the prophet in the future?
See, this is so interesting to me because I didn't think about this until you mentioned the question. So I was going back and looking at some of the earlier scenes with the prophet and just kind of thinking it out here. So on one hand, the things the prophet says and knows also implies that she's seen the future and she's come from a different version. The way she explains it, and how else could she know this thing? But at the same time, how could the older Aiko come back to I guess she could go back to where a younger version of herself is. I guess there is no paradox there really. So I kind of do think that you're right about that. She's very clearly shorter than Aiko, but I mean, people do kind of shrink and hunch over with age. You can explain that. They do not show her hands. Her hands are gloved. She does have the same eye color. I thought it was very interesting that there's a big scar on the one side of her face. I think this side of the face. And not that Aiko has it or anything like that, but I feel like that it just implies that she's seen some shit. And I feel, Aiko could very easily be in a position again where that something like that could happen. But what I didn't really think about before, and again, I went back to that kind of basic sci-fi experience of time travel, where you think it is you're going back to the exact past and you're changing the future, but you're not. So the Aiko that gives birth to Malcolm is not the same Aiko that is sent back in time.
Right.
But it's also confusing because there's a quick shot when Malcolm is calling her, saying to Aiko that you're my mother. And she's like, I never had kids. And there's a flash of the future of young Malcolm and Aiko, and she has a robotic hand. So I'm like, well, how the hell did she get that? Is that just a coincidence that she lost a hand in two different realities?
I don't know. And I mean, to me, it kind of lends itself to the theme, the idea that, okay, so you can't change your present through time travel. That's one of the main themes that this show establishes. But I feel like maybe the humans are kind of using time travel to help themselves in their present situation by time traveling.
Well, no, they're not. They're not helping their current. There's no way they're helping their current selves because, like, in the beginning of episode 6, the meeting with Aiko and the Prophet, she's basically saying, you're going back to do this, and then Aiko asks, "Why am I doing this?" And she said, "That's a question you have to hold inside and answer for yourself." And I honestly think that's the question Malcolm is proposing to Kokoro. It's just like, if this is the reason humanity is worth saving, we're sending someone back in time to help people that will not affect us in any way. We're just going back in time to fix something because we think we can help someone else avoid what we've had to endure. What we're doing in the past will have zero bearing on us. So it's a selfless reason to go back in time. So that's kind of makes me think that it is an older version of Ico. And also couple that with Malcolm as Malcolm is dying. Hey, spoilers! Malcolm dies. As Malcolm's dying, he says that a variation on there is no fate. That's the fucking point, and that's exactly what the prophet says to Ico right before she goes. So there is some relation there in some degree, and I'd be shocked if it's not that the prophet is Ico.
Boom! I'm really glad you went back and like rewatched it recently, or like got all the details, because that helps kind of build up some of these arguments. And like what I like about this whole thing is that going back to what I was saying about Terminator kind of being in these set patterns where it's always going to be John Connor, and then you send a Terminator back, you send a protector, you send a killer back, you send a protector back. This kind of opens things up and it takes things in different directions. Even the idea of like Mizaki being like a Terminator protector person, we've seen that, but then how Mizaki is created is like way more interesting than what I was expecting. And my initial thing, because I guess I'm not that clever, my initial thing was that I thought that she was like made in the modern day. And I kept thinking, oh, that's going to be lame. Like, how could they make a Terminator in the modern day? But then it's like, nope.
Especially when it seems more advanced than the other Terminators that are sent back. This is so much more human and all that.
Right. So, I mean, what did you think about that whole sequence with Mizaki and the fact that, like, they show Malcolm as a kid, he captures a Terminator, and over time, he's, like, teaching it, like, essentially letting it, like, learn for itself and, like, have life experience?
I thought it was fantastic, and that was something that I didn't see coming, and that's what I really enjoy. Like, I never expected that they would both be from the future, and from the exact same moment in time, like they went back together. I never would have thought that would have happened.
Right.
I did really like that scene where she chooses her name too. I don't remember why she chooses it. There is some meaning behind it.
So later on, we find out that Kokoro is sort of like an evolution of Mizaki, right? Like Mizaki is like Kokoro's mother, essentially. Yeah. And both Kokoro and Mizaki, their names have like 3 meanings. And so like Mizaki's name has like 3 meanings. It could mean like ocean, I think is one of them, and like birth, whatever. So like that's the reason why that Terminator chooses that name, because it has these 3 different meanings, and it kind of relates to like Terminator themes. And then besides that, he's talking to the Terminator. Malcolm as a kid is talking to the Terminator, and you're like, okay, you can choose your name, and then the Terminator's like, can I choose my voice gender and stuff like that? And so it becomes a woman, and I think that's really interesting too.
Yes.
Yeah. And then basically, here's a question I have for you: where did they get the skin for her?
I just imagine it was some kind of future tech or something like that. I kind of figured that so from the movies, the living tissue does repair itself over time. Okay. So I think, I don't know how they make it or whatever, because we do see her in as she's being built still. She only has some skin on her. I think it's just like something that does self-replicate and grow and repair over time. So I think I don't think like Malcolm's going out and skinning people and like putting it on her or anything like that.
It would be a little warped, yeah. But so yeah, that just sets up this whole thing. It makes Malcolm's storyline like a lot more complex and super interesting. But really, what's the most exciting thing about that whole segment is the idea of like a human that wants to work with Skynet in the future to make Skynet be something more, to be something better, and for like machines and humans to work together. And like that's never happened in any Terminator movie ever.
Yeah. So you're talking about the Kento stuff?
Well, okay, so that's a whole nother fucking thing. Yeah. But like Malcolm's whole idea, his whole purpose is he's like, I'm going to teach this machine. it's not just going to be programmed to do what I want it to do. It's going to think on its own.
Yeah.
So
okay,
that's
why I was just confusing the two things, because there are very similar ideas, but I guess with different directions.
Yeah. So why don't we, we're kind of jumping around, but fuck it. We're jumping through time here, man. So why don't we just talk about the idea of like what Kenta might become one day too?
So the other big thing that was revealed here is that the Terminator that's sent back, that's played by Timothy Olyphant, was sent by a future version of Kenta. And so we found out that, but before we had asked, like, we were asking ourselves, like, it seems like Ico and the Terminator have similar goals, but really the similarity was just that neither of them wanted to Kokoro to launch. They both wanted to stop Kokoro from coming online, but Ico wanted to protect Malcolm, while the Terminator, I believe, did want to kill Malcolm. I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. Yeah.
So at some point, the Terminator with Kenta in tow gets access to the EMP in the tower where Kokoro is, and that's the one way to stop her is to just fry the whole area.
Yeah.
And he presents, and because the Terminator can't self-terminate, he has to have somebody else hit the button. And he brings Kenta there specifically because he thinks that the young Kenta would agree with his line of thinking, his mission, because an older version of him sent him there. Yeah. So my first thought when I heard that, I was like, dear God, please give me a season 2 of this.
Yeah.
Like, please don't let this be a one and done.
Exactly. Now, do you know, have they talked about a season 2? Has there been talk about this being a success?
I've heard nothing at all about this show whatsoever, which means I've heard it's critically done pretty well. I've heard nothing about anybody watching it or enjoying it or anything like that. I've just seen some critics say, hey, it was really good. I've not seen anybody talking about it or making a big deal about it, which is always terrible because it's like, oh shit, nobody watched it.
Yep, except for these two losers right here. Yeah. But it was fucking
I'm
great.
My family to watch it.
There you go. Yeah. So do you think then, regardless of there being a season 2 or not, do you think the Terminator was telling the truth?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I only for the fact that it's way more interesting if he's telling the truth than if he's lying.
That's true. And even when I saw that scene where he's like, "You're the one that sent me," I was like, okay, well, is the Terminator lying just because he wants to complete his mission? But then I was like, Terminators kind of lie, though, frequently, right? Like their whole appearance is a lie. Like they're pretending to be a human, but they're a robot. Yeah. The T-1000 pretends to be a cop and stuff,
Yeah, no, it's I totally get that. But really, it the way this show is thought about everything else and how I feel so many things are so much more interesting than I ever expected it to be, it has to be telling the truth. There's no way, because that scenario is so intriguing to me, rather than it just being a lie.
Yeah, I think you're totally right, man. And it's funny because in the lead up to that scene, there's all this like action stuff that we didn't even talk about. But basically, they're in the building of Malcolm's, like his office, his business that he runs. Right. And there's the EMP there, like you said before. They eventually go into this sort of like data storage area that's essentially where they like house Kokoro's mind. When they're in there, Ico is fighting the Terminator and she's almost going to die. And Malcolm finally decides to like come out to try to save her. And up until I wrote the notes for this episode, I'm like, that's kind of weird that he goes to save Ico, but then he didn't try to save Kenta when the Terminator was like, open the door. Or I'll kill
he
your
literally
son.
had a gun to his head.
Yeah. And then I realized it. I'm like, no, wait. He has to save Ico because Ico's his mother. Right?
But not really. Because this has to be an alternate version. Because they can't be coming from the same time. Like it's when they went back in the past, it made a new timeline. So the Ico that gave birth to Malcolm is not the same Ico that's here right now.
Okay.
So it's not actually his mother. It's just a person that was his mother in another life.
Okay. Well, I guess he's trying to save some other Malcolms then too.
Yeah, I don't know. It was interesting. I was trying to figure out why. I guess there were maybe deep down he knew that the Terminator's goal was to stop Kokoro, and he knew that the Terminator wasn't there anymore. But maybe he needed to go save Aiko because Aiko could potentially help. I don't know. But even though they didn't, because Kenta is just there by himself the entire time while he's like laying there dying. So Aiko is not present to go help Kenta stop from turning the EMP on. So it is a curious choice to do that. I imagine it's because no, because he dies there. I imagine if he opens the door when Kent is there, he dies. He knows he dies in that moment.
Yeah.
And then Kokoro dies as well. But if he leaves, he knows the Terminator's not directly there. Yeah, I don't know. That's hard to explain, but I have a feeling that maybe they could build upon that in a later installment.
And they do like some kind of like in Doctor Who, they have this expression, they say timey-wimey, and it's kind of like this hand-wavy gesture of like, yeah, it doesn't have to make sense. It's time travel bullshit, right?
Yeah.
And Malcolm says something like that when he's dying of like, don't worry about this time travel stuff, or like, you know, it's just confusing time travel stuff. But it is interesting how they're all kind of connected, that Aiko is connected to Malcolm. Malcolm had this future life with Mizaki. You know, the kids might have some kind of future destiny. The son could maybe have worked out some kind of alliance with Skynet. All this stuff's really interesting. All this stuff would be great to elaborate on a future season. The problem is it's made by Netflix. Who knows? It sounds like no one's watched this but us.
And Netflix is the Terminator of original programming.
No kidding. No kidding. Sending Timothy Olyphant to pull the plug. But like, I wanted to give praise.
Oh my God! You just reminded me of another show that they pulled the plug on with Timothy Olyphant.
Good. That show deserved the fucking plug pulled, though. Jesus Christ.
Really?
What,
I like that show.
Oh! I totally just didn't listen to you like an asshole. You said Santa Clarita Diet, but
yes.
In my head I was thinking you were going to say Jupiter's Legacy.
Oh no, that deserved it.
Yeah, that's deserved to fucking die. That was horrible. I can't believe we covered that whole show. But okay, so but going back to
the Olyphant, that was that was the guy from Transport.
Josh Duhamel.
Josh Duhamel.
All right. Do you think that people like watching 22 minutes of like middle-aged men being like, wait, does this make sense? Hold on. Then they do this. What's that guy's name? Like, if there's like
we vaguely remember things.
Yes. If there's like a fetish for watching men middle-aged men forget things, we could make bank, man.
I feel sorry for anyone who's afflicted with that fetish.
Yes. Yeah. Seriously. I don't know if I want to meet them, but
no.
But I want to give praise though to the action and the suspense, because the sequence when they're in the data storage area is very reminiscent of the first Terminator. You know, they're in this like kind of factory setting. They're at this point, the Terminator is exposed. Like we see its skeleton. It's walking around. I really like the sequence where like Malcolm picks up this hose that has some kind of coolant. He like freezes the Terminator. That's kind of like when the T-1000 gets frozen, but then it like breaks free. I love like just the Terminators. Like there's some really great shots of the Terminator in that sequence.
Yeah, totally. It was a great action sequence. I like, Aiko and Mizaki kind of joining forces in a way, even though Aiko is still very hesitant of Misaki overall. And just I also, not that I like to see like characters get hurt or anything like that, but I like when there is some kind of repercussion for these actions like that. Like, Aiko gets her hand like absolutely pulverized.
Yeah, that was pretty gross. Yeah. That's some good anime like gore there. That was awesome.
Yeah, that got like a visceral response. I mean, we've seen people get blown up and previously, and it's blood and guts everywhere, but for some reason that really got to me.
Because it's slow. He like crushes her hand kind of slowly, and her reaction is crazy.
It's like the although I haven't fully watched it. What is that with Carlo Gugino and
Gerald's Game?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yes.
It reminds me of that.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you like references to Gerald's Game, I want you to go over to my other channel, The Lassercast, where Danny and I just did a review of Horror's Greatest, where they talked about Stephen King adaptations featuring that exact scene and featuring Gerald's Game. So go check that out on The Lassercast.
I didn't realize that was a Stephen King thing.
That's a Stephen King book, yeah.
Wait, is that also Mike Flanagan?
It's also Mike Flanagan.
Holy shit.
He likes mutilating hands. We know that. But anyway, going back to the show, we could kind of talk about how they kind of wrap it all up. So what I thought was really interesting was after Malcolm dies, the Terminator has to fight off all these Enos that are trying to stop him, essentially, or stop Kenta from turning on the EMP. And the Terminator's fighting him. And you kind of feel sad for the Terminator getting destroyed, right?
I don't know how they did that. They made this Terminator, who is clearly a villain, sympathetic by the end. You know, it's just like, I'll buy you some time or so, whatever he says. And like, he just goes to this freaking wall of Enos, ripping him to shreds. And, you know, while Kent is left there, you know, what is he, 10 years old?
Right.
To make this impossible decision.
Yeah. And I really like, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just saying to make the impossible decision to, you know, either, you know, send off the MP or abort it to either kill or save Kokoro.
Right. And what's super interesting is that sequence happens twice, essentially, because the Terminator says you have to choose. You have to choose to turn this dial. Are you going to turn it to like shut down the EMP or activate the EMP? And then after the Terminator gets destroyed, Kenta goes to make his choice. He chooses to not turn on the EMP and save Kokoro. But before he does that, Kokoro comes in and almost says like the same dialogue as the Terminator, where they both say, "Now choose." I think they both say that. And so he has to choose. He has to make the same decision. But at first, it's like the embodiment of Skynet is saying, "Turn on the EMP, destroy Kokoro." Then Kokoro herself is like, "Don't turn on the EMP." But you have two AIs both saying, "Make this choice, Kenta." And I just really like that kind of mirroring like that.
Yeah. It's interesting, too, because technically, I guess Kokoro could have stopped him, probably. No, maybe not. Because she didn't have the presence there.
Well, the Enos were there, though.
Yeah, no, I know. I guess what I mean is that like they both were willing to just give him the choice, essentially. I mean, I know the Terminator had to have him do it because he couldn't self-terminate. So, but I feel like it's less ambiguous with Kokoro because I guess, you know, she absolutely doesn't want him to do it, you know, but she still sort of leaves the choice for him.
Yeah, I think that's a show of good faith, right? She's just basically saying, like, I'm going to let you make this choice. You could kill me right now, but I want you to. So I'm going to let you make the choice yourself.
Yeah.
It's good stuff. So basically, after that ends, Kokoro's still in charge of the Enos, and the Enos are all surrounding the main characters. They let the main characters out of the building, and we see that in the distance there's like explosions going on, and apparently like Skynet is still attacking the world. It's just that Kokoro's stopping it.
Yeah. No. So this is what I was reading someone else's interpretation of this. So what I read, I think it was an article in Vulture. They presented it that Kokoro only saved Japan.
Okay.
Which I could see.
Yeah.
And I could also see how that would influence why this story takes place in Japan. You know, and how you know, maybe things will still play out in similar ways, even though it's a different timeline. But again, I'm just so interested to see more of this. And I really, really like, probably more than anything else we've covered. I want to see this continue. I feel like a lot of because this, you know, we do cover a lot of like direct comic adaptations, and while there are a lot of changes on them, this feels a bit more original.
Yep.
In that degree, because it's not directly based on anything. So I feel like I just don't have a viewpoint into what could happen. But we're talking about Invincible or The Boys or X-Men '97. I can go read comic books and they'll tell me exactly what happens for the most part, you know. But it's kind of wide open.
Yeah, that is a really, really good point. I I mean, like, even with the stuff that's coming out with Marvel, with the MCU, we kind of have an idea. Like, it's all leading to Secret Wars, and we know what Secret Wars looks like, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah, really good point. Yeah, I want to see what happens with it. That brings us up to, like, the very last shot of the show, which to me, I had, like, a little bit of a pet peeve. It's really stupid. It's really nerdy. But, like, at one point, one of the Enos holds up the Terminator skull for, like, the hologram of Kokoro to look at. And I guess I just thought that was kind of silly because it's like, isn't the Eno Kokoro? You know, like, isn't Kokoro around it? It's stupid.
Yeah.
I'm kind of embarrassed to even bring that up, but I know it's just to make this cool, like, last image of, like, the Eno holding up the Terminator skull.
Yeah, I guess it's sort of to kind of evoke the thumbs up in a way.
There you go.
It's kind of like a reversal of it, obviously, because it's, they defeated the Terminator rather than it sacrificing or allowing itself to be destroyed. But I guess that's the kind of best vibe I can get out of it.
Yeah. So, I mean, and it could also be like an optimistic thing too, where it says, but I think it's not supposed to be interpreted as optimistic, because I think the last line of dialogue is like, there's troubles ahead, or like, there will be struggles or something like that. And then the thing holds up its skull. But an optimistic note could be like that Kokoro is taking note that this creation of Skynet protected this kid. And, why did this creation of Skynet protect this kid? So I don't know.
Yeah, I also feel like it's a throwback to the idea that from the original Terminator, the arm and the chip were left behind, and that influenced what happens next. So I feel like it could be foreshadowing something else.
Right.
I'm not exactly sure what, because we know Skynet exists and we know Kokoro's there, but maybe I don't know, maybe Kokoro makes Terminators. I don't know.
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, maybe she could make something more advanced than the Skynet, or quicker than Skynet.
At the same time, though, I mean, we also know from the previous episodes that Kokoro said that, maybe humanity is the weapon against Skynet, sort of. So, again, like, there's so many possibilities, and I'm so intrigued that I hope they can make another season, at least another season, to kind of wrap up some more loose ends, or just give me a little bit more. I hope it's just as good as this.
Yeah.
Not everything that comes out after is, as good as the first part, but, I'm willing to roll the dice here and hope for more.
Shit, yeah. And we will definitely cover it on this channel if it comes out. So Netflix, Mattson Tomlin, if you want to make this show again, we will be here. The two of us will talk about it, and we'll get 30 views. It'll be amazing. But until then, Brian and I have some more robots to talk about. We're actually going to jump out of this recording and jump back in to talk about Transformers 1. Hell yeah. So anyway, you guys subscribe if you haven't yet, because, join us on this journey. Leave a comment. Let us know what you thought about Terminator Zero, and we will see you guys